So before we start, a little bit of introduction. My name is Franklin Collier. I'm a front-end engineer and an instructor on Just Projects. And today, I'll be taking the class on Z-index. So this is an article I wrote by myself. I'm going to share it. So after the class, you can go back, reference it whenever you have issues with Z-index and work with it. So I'm going to share it in the chat. You can bookmark it and use it later. So I'll be using it to teach Z-index. If you're a seasoned engineer, you know that Z-index is one of the most confusing topics in CSS. CSS itself is not straightforward. So using things like Z-index, transform, translate, those things are kind of sketchy. They're not really straightforward. And to properly understand them, there is a need for you to understand how Z-index works properly. So before we start, I want us to understand something in CSS. It's called stacking context, and to demonstrate that, I'll be using CodePen to demonstrate that. I'll be writing some CSS, so you just have to give me some moments to write it completely. So stacking context, I'll talk why I write the code. So stacking context is simply it's simply how the browser renders elements in itself. So let me quickly create something to explain it. So let me copy and paste this stuff. So yeah, so stacking context. If you check this article, which I'm going to read it out from this article, what is stacking context? Stacking context is simply a term used to define how the browser decides which element in the DOM comes first and which to render on top. So if you don't know what the DOM is, the DOM means document object model. It simply means every element in the DOM. This div now is an element in the DOM. This one is an element in the DOM. All these things are elements of the browser's DOM. If I add a H1 here, it is also an element in the DOM. So how does the browser decides which one comes on top? This is called stacking context. So if you see from this illustration I just created here, you can see that the browser stacks DOM elements as if we are stacking books on top of each other. That is why from this article you can see that I made a graphical representation of how books are stacked. That is how the browser stacks elements of the DOM. So it checks the one, okay, the green box is the first one, so it keeps it on the floor. Pink box, it puts it on top. Blue box, it puts it on top. So that's how the elements stack. That's how the browser stacks element. It stacks it that okay, the last element to be added comes first, and the first element to be added comes last. Just think of a book, how you stack books or plates in a kitchen. That's how the browser stacks elements. It's called stacking context. The browser has to decide, has to do some calculations. Okay, now right now, the browser says, okay, green box, okay, you're going to be down, pink box, you're going to be up on top of green box, and blue box, you're going to be on top. This is called stacking context. It simply means how the browser decides which DOM elements to add. So that's what stacking context means. And sometimes we misunderstand what Z index truly means. Some of us think that, like some seasoned engineers who have had issues with CSS or have learned CSS to some extent, they don't fully understand what Z index means. And for you that is just learning, starting to understand this property, I want you to understand that Z index is not a property that is used to make an element come on top. No, that's not what Z index means. When I was learning, I go through YouTube, go through some teachers on YouTube. They just say that Z-index is used to add an element on top of one another, which is wrong. Z-index is used to tell the browser that it should recalculate the stacking context based on some rules, which means that if some rules are not met, Z-index will not work. For example, now the most popular teaching is that Z-index is used to make an element come on top, which will lead engineers to say, okay, let me just add Z-index 6, and by God's grace the green box should come on top. But you can see that no matter how many number you add here, I can add, wait, let this reload. I can add 15. 15. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I can add 15. You can see that the green box is not coming on top. I can add any number of the index I want to. It's not going to come on top. And this leads to frustration because you think that, okay, the tutor I learned from told me that Z index is used to make an element come on top of one another. So why is this not happening? There's something I want us to understand, that the browser is very strict. It will not break its rule because of anything. The rule is that any element that is below, any element that is first to appear on the page is usually the last on the page. Let's say you are building something in the browser. I'm going to use something my friend shared to me. This is something my friend built, and I want to use it to demonstrate something. So if you see this now, this website consists of I'm just going to minimize the screen. So this website consists of some few parts. You can see it consists of header. You can see it has this black background. We have the hero section here. We have this case studies section. We have this credit card information. We have the solution section. We have this call to action, and we have the footer. So when the browser first looks at this structure, his first mind is that, okay, just like, remember, just always think of a book or a plate. You finish washing a plate and you want to stack them on one another, or you are done reading your books and you want to take them inside and you want to like stack them on each other. The browser see, okay, what is the first element that is being created in this DOM? We know that the first element being created when you're building a website is usually the header, which is this element containing this spa logo and the login and the start now. So what does the browser do? The browser renders it in the bottom of the stacking context. So it's at the bottom. That, like, when you want to pack your book and you add the first book is at the bottom, right? Now the next one is the hero section. The browser checks it. Okay, it comes second. It's after the header, so it's going to add it on top of this guy. So just like that, it stacks all of them one after the other until it gets to this place, meaning that the last element to be displayed is actually the one on top. That's how the browser stacks it. So whenever I think of stacking context, just think of how books are stacked or how plates are stacked. The last element to be added is actually the first on top, and the first element to be added is actually the last on top. I'll repeat it again. The last element, which is this blue box, will be the first on top, while the first element to be added will be the last in the stacking context. That's just it. And for Z index to work, you may be wondering, but okay, so what is Z index for actually? If it can't simply if it can't simply make the browser recalculate the browser context, the stacking context. So I'm going to introduce something called the first law of Z index. So the first law of Z index is that only positioned elements works. So position element always comes on top. So even without using Z index and you want to make this green box come on top, there's a simple law in the in the stacking context land that says position elements always come on top. So how do we demonstrate that? So if I want this green box to come on top every other thing, I'm just going to come here and say position relative. And once I do that, you can see that the green box comes on top the pink, and it also comes on top the blue. But because if I remove the blue, sorry, the pink box, you can see that the green box is actually on top. So that is one law of the stacking context. It says that the position element will always come on top. I actually highlighted it here on the article. Position element always comes on top. When you're reading this article, you can go through the code pen, you can run the code pen, check the results, you can play around, you can fork it to your own account, play around, change some things. You are free to do whatever you want to do. So that's the first law. So whenever you are building, just put it in mind that the stacking context has some law guiding it. The browser don't just do things out of its own free will. You must adhere to the laws it gives you. So for example, now say I come to this pink box now and I still add a Z index here, because of course I want it to be on top of the green box, and I say Z index of 9999999. I don't care how many numbers you add here. The pink box will not come on top because the Z index has a law, and the law, sorry, the stacking context has a law, and the law must be obeyed, which is that positive positioned element will always come on top in the stacking context. It does not care how much Z index you add, it does not care. So let's say you are building something and you added position element to something, and you are finding it funny that after adding so much Z index, it's simply not coming on top. Just find a place where there's a position relative or position absolute that you can change. That's it. So let's go to the next. So there's actually a gotcha. So if you add position static, it's going to return back to the natural position. Why? Because in browsers, in every element has a default value that sometimes, for example, now 0 is a number, but when you want to start counting, you don't start counting from 1. You don't start counting from 0, sorry. You start counting from 1. There's this invisible default that is applies to everything in the world. So the invisible default that applies to every element in the DOM is actually position static. Every element is position static. So you adding position relative, you're already changing the default. And once you change the default, you are telling the browser to recalculate its stacking context rule and make changes where it's possible. So that's how it works. So the next law is that how do you use Z-index properly? First of all, you must obey the law of the browser context. Okay, you want the green box to come on top, the pink box. It's very simple. Just add position relative. That's all you need to do, and that guy is on top. Simple, no stress. But what if a time where you want this guy to have a positioned relative property, because maybe inside this green box you have a position absolute elements that you want to be positioned relative to the green box, and this position relative is very important, but yet you want the pink box to come on top. So you already know that using Z index like this is not going to work. So what you're just going to do is to just add position relative here. Make this one also a position relative. Maybe reduce the number. You don't need to just hit just maybe 2, and you can see that the pink box is on top of the green box. That's just all it takes. So always add whenever you want to use the index, just keep one rule in mind that you must always use it together with something that has together with a positioned property. So if I should take away this guy out, you see that it's going to come back to the default. It's just like that. So you must always add position relative or absolute or fixed anything for it to for the stacking context to recalculate. So the next one is so this thing is a z-index property in an isolated stacking context is not regarded outside the isolated stacking context. That's English, but I'm going to explain. So like I said, you can go over this article, read it. I'm just here to give some practical explanation. So I'm going to run this code pen. I'm going to run this code pen, and I'm going to try and do some copy and paste so I can preserve the original state for people that are going to read the article. So just give me a few minutes to do this. So from the whole thing, from this stuff now, there's an issue here. As you can see, this issue, this this button here is going over this pink border, and we don't want that. What we want is very simple. We want this header to stick to the top. Let's say you are building something like this website now, this SP. You can see what we are doing here. It's very simple. Once we scroll, we want every other page that is not the header to go under the header. So just like this, everything is going under the header, very neatly under the header. There's no element here. Like you can't find this one coming on top. No, everything is going under. And even though Mr. Von added this one to be like position relative Z index 555, we don't want it to come above the header. We really want it to compete with the element here. We don't want it to come out above the header, but the it's a different case here because you can see that the click here to subscribe button is going over. It's going over this guy, and it's not supposed to be so. So how do we solve this? What is the problem causing this? This is simply because if you go through the code, the header, this is the header. The header has, because the header is the last on the stacking context, we know that the blue box will come over it, and we don't want that. So we added position sticky, making it stick to the top. Then we added the Z index 2 so that it is above every other page, every other element in the DOM. Fine. Now when we come to the main, we just define position relative because why? We want we want this button to stick relative to this container. So I don't know if any of you have learned about position element, but that's what position element does. You just use it to like position things relative to itself or to the container it's with. So I added a position relative on the main because I want this button to stick relative to this container. If I didn't add it, it's going to stick relative to the browser window. So you can read more about position relative in your spare time. So that's what we want. And we added a Z index or 2 because we want this button to be above every content on this page. That was the goal of this whole exercise I did here. But for some reason, the button is not staying in this page, it's going over this guy. And I want you guys to just like try and think within you what is really causing the issue. Like I will give everybody like let's say 2 minutes to just like think what is really causing this issue. I'm going to paste this stuff. This one, this second one. Just go through it and just try and like debug what is causing the issue. I just give everybody like 2 minutes. By 8:55, I would resume with the answer. Just see if you can go through it and tell me what is the issue. Okay. Okay, was anybody able to figure it out? You can just like raise your hand or you can just add the comments in the chat. Okay, I don't think anybody was able to figure it out. So I'll just like explain what is going on here. So we added a position sticky and we gave it a Z index of 2. And remember, for the stacking context to work, there must be two things. There must be something involved, which is the first law, which is that stacking context works only on position elements. And here we have two position elements. We have the position sticky and we have position relative and we have position sticky too for the header. Now, once the browser sees this, he say, okay, fine. Since everybody has position element, what do I do? I return back to my default. And what is the default? The default is rendering them based on how they appear. So the default is that the header will be last and this main page will be on top of it. But then the browser comes again and look at the header. It says, okay, the header has a Z index of 2. And this Z index has given it an idea that, okay, it needs to push this header further from the page. So meaning that the header is going to be on top. And this main page, this blue element will be under the header. Fine. It does that. But then it realizes that this button also has a Z index of 2. Same Z index with the header. And the browser stops to think, okay, the header has a Z index, the header has a position of sticky, the button has a position of sticky, making them equal. The header has a Z index of 2, the button has a Z index of 2, making them equal. So how does the browser now decide which comes on top? Like I said, when everything is equal, the browser goes back to the default way, which is choosing the one that comes first, putting it last, and the one that comes last, putting it first. From this page, we can tell that the button comes last. So automatically, the browser renders the button on top of the header, which is why this thing is happening like this. So how do we curb this issue? How do we make sure that something like this don't happen? Because we want our button to only be above its sibling element. So for example now, if you see now, if we fix the issue, you can see that the button is supposed to be on top of this text here, not going above the header. So how do we do that? It's just simply coming to the main and adding a z index that is lower than the header. So if I come and add a z index of 1 and code pen automatically does, I can see that the button now goes under it. So this is actually a law, and if you go through the law, if I read it again, let me read the law again. Okay, yeah, this is it. It said a z-index property in an isolated stacking context is not regarded outside the isolated stacking context. That's a lot of English, but I'll explain. So it's saying that a z-index inside an element that has a z-index is not regarded. That's just what it means. So right now, even though I put this z-index of this button to 3 million, as long as its parent has a z-index, the browser is going to ignore it. It will never ever ever give it priority. So if I see, as you can see now, that's what is happening. So even though I add 3 trillion or 3 zillion, this button is never going to come on top. And remember, the parent only has a z index of 1. That's just how it is. So a z index inside another z index will not be regarded. So if even though I create another element inside this main and I add a z index of 5 million, it's not going to come on top the header simply because its parent already has a z index. And I gave an analogy in this article. It's called the captain analogy. So I'm going to read it. Like I said, you can go back to this article and you can learn. It's pretty comprehensive. So in a plane, there are usually two pilots, both of whom are equally qualified to fly and captain an airplane. But only one of those two pilots are actually chosen to be the captain of that specific flight. As long as the chosen captain is not missing, sick, or injured during the course of the flight, there is no need for the second pilot to assume being captain. So if you apply this thing to this whole thing now, we know that there are two captains here that have a Z index. We have the main, because the main and the button are parent and child, right? So the main has a Z index, the button has a Z index, making them the two pilots from this analogy. But then remember we said that as long as the captain pilot, the pilot that is captain, is not injured, meaning that we did not remove the Z index or the Z index is not 0, there's no need for the second pilot to assume being captain, which is this Z index. There's no need for it to for the brother to recognize it. Then there's something that says, but in a situation where something bad happens to the chosen pilot, the second pilot is allowed and mandated to be captain. So let's say we remove the Z index from this guy. By the analogy I just read out now, because the first captain has been maybe sick or he injured himself during the course of the flight, the second captain is not allowed to take over, which is now the button. Is not allowed to take over the browser, allowed to tell the browser that okay, fine, render me on top of the header. That's just it. So that's how it works. So like I said, you can go over this article and read it. So that is the stuff. Now sometimes we may not want to um add this stuff. We may not want to add this Z index because, for example, now it does not make sense to add the Z index because we simply want to constrain this button from going over the header. It doesn't make sense. Understand? It doesn't make sense to me. And for example, now let's say I write this code and I go on a vacation, I stay for like 3 months without touching my code base, and I come back and I want to make an edit. I want to change this code base. I want to add a new feature. Then I come here and I see this Z index of 1, and I know that since this one is Z index 2, what is this Z index 1 doing here actually? What's his job? But unknown to us, unknown to our future self, we know that we put this thing to constrain this button here so that the browser does not regard its own Z index. So we just like remove it. Pam. And once we remove it, so something else happens. I'll be like, okay, they'll start scratching our head and saying, oh, how do I resolve this? How do I resolve this? Now the Chrome, sorry, the CSS specification, the people in charge of building CSS now brought out a property called isolation isolate. It's called isolation isolate. This is it, isolation isolate. What does it do? It is a property that allows you to hand over a stacking context to the parent of a container. So who is the parent of this button now? We know is the main, right? And we don't want the browser to look at this button. Maybe, of course, maybe by our code, we want the button to be floating all over every element. Fine. But since we don't want it to be floating over any element, we want the main parent to take charge of the Z index and smoothing it so that it goes under everything, but still it goes above its own siblings. I don't know if I'm making sense. So to do that, the CSS specification provides something called isolation, isolation, isolate. So you are trying to isolate this you're trying to isolate the button on its own to stay within its parent so that the browser does not look at its own. It's like this thing is like something that blinds the browser. It blinds the browser from seeing every other Z index inside this parent container. So once I do that, you can see that it works as expected. So this is like telling the browser that, oh, hey, I have a Z index inside me. I have a Z index as a child. Please disregard it and just do your thing. The brother will be like, okay, fine, no wahala. I'll do that for you. No problem. I'll do it for you. That's just how it works. So that's how Z index works. So some people will be asking that, okay, what is really the function of Z index? I'm going to use an analogy called there's this 4D or 3D animations that we usually see. I've seen some of them in Japan, I've seen some of them in Lagos, I've seen some of them in different states. It's as if the characters are coming out of the screen, like as if they are coming out, like you see a dragon, like it's as if it's coming out of the screen, it's touching the edges of the screen. It's called 3D rendering. The browser has a 3D engine, and for you to activate that 3D engine, you need to use something like Z-index. So Z-index pushes the element as if it's coming out of the screen, but it's not really coming out of the screen. It's just a illusion, a 3D illusion. So that's how Z-index works. It pushes elements further to the user's eyes, making it feel as if it is coming on top. For example, here now, if I take away this stuff, you can see that the button is on top. It's just a 3D illusion that makes us feel as if the button is above the header, because Z-index is actually pushing the elements further to our eyes and away from the browser node. So that's how Z-index works. So Z-index is not used to make an element come on top. You have seen that clearly when I use the first solution. It's simply used to create a stacking context. That's just what it is. And what is stacking context? A stacking context is how the browser defines what elements comes on top and what elements goes below. This is my first time actually doing a teaching. I might be a little bit fast, nervous. Please forgive me for that. The article is here. Everything I explained here is explained deeply in the article. I just wanted to like explain it deeply from with my voice. So that's the end of this session. Thank you very much for listening.